My definition of persuasion is the ability to move people in your direction, in the direction of your offer, without changing the merits of that offer one bit, but only changing the way you deliver those merits, the way you present those merits to the recipient of your offer. And that's all psychology, isn't it? I mean, it's not design of the product or service. It's not production. It's not anything like that. It's about the ability to convey or communicate those merits in a way that makes them more attractive to the individual involved. That's actually how I got interested in studying the influence process. All my life, I've been a kind of a sucker, a patsy, an easy pushover for the appeals of salespeople who would come to my door, people selling magazines, or asking me to contribute to causes I've never heard of. And I would always find myself in unwanted possession of these things, or giving contributions to causes that on their merits didn't seem to be enough to generate that. What could it have been? And it occurred to me, it must have been something in the psychology of the way they presented those merits to me that made them come alive, made them grab me and want to possess them. So I started to study the influence process, partially out of self-defense, but more generally out of an intriguing question of what are those delivery systems that we might have, those psychological keys that we could employ to make the influence process more successful. For me, the levers of influence are the universal principles of persuasion that, if incorporated into a request, a proposal, a recommendation we would make to others, significantly increase the likelihood that we will hear yes, that we will get assent to what we're proposing. Right? Now, I want to be careful to emphasize the word likelihood here, because we're talking about human behavior and behavioral science, not magic. You'll never get any principle or tactic or strategy or practice that works on everybody all the time. But using these scientifically proven principles of persuasion, the levers of influence, you can guarantee that you will increase the likelihood of success every time. And if you do this, and your opponents don't, your rivals don't, you'll beat them every time. So that's one of the levers of influence, one of the principles that, if included in a message or an approach, significantly increases the likelihood of assent. The principle of reciprocity or reciprocation exists in every human society. And every human society trains its members from childhood in this rule that says we are obligated to give back to others the form of behavior they have given to us. Right? So if you invite me to a party, I'm obligated to invite you to one of mine. If you remember my birthday with a card or a gift, I'm obligated to do the same for you. And if you do me a favor, Robert, I owe you a favor. And I'll say very simply, in the context of obligation, people say yes to those they owe. You see the implication here? If we go first, if we're the first to give benefits or advantages or information or even a positive mood a positive outlook at the office, we will get that back. Have you ever walked down a corridor and you see somebody coming towards you and you smile at that person, right? What do you get? You get a smile. But you only guarantee that you will get that smile if you go first. So this is what the rule says. Whatever you want in a situation, if you give it first, people will give that back to you. Right? Let's take an example from a study that was done in Southern California in a chocolate shop. They did a little experiment. 1 week, all of the customers who came in were met by the manager at the door, greeted warmly, and then escorted to the candy counter where they could make their choices. That was for half. The other half were greeted warmly and given a small piece of chocolate and then escorted to the counter. Those people were 42% more likely to buy candy. They had received, and they felt obligated to give back, even though it was just a little morsel of chocolate. Now, you might say, well, maybe they just liked the chocolate and thought, oh, well, I'll get more of this. But if you look deeply into the data of this study, that's not what happened. The majority of them didn't buy any more chocolate. They bought small amounts or amounts of other things at the counter. Right? So it wasn't what they had received. It was that they had received that spurred them to move. Here's one more example, a study that shows the importance of going first with all of this. This was done in McDonald's locations in South America, Colombia, and Brazil. They tried a little experiment. When families came into the store, they wanted to increase the total amount of food that they purchased. So the kids of the family, each one of them would get a balloon, right? But they changed when the kid would get the balloon, when the kids would get the balloon. For half of the kids, it was as they came in. For the other half, it was as they were leaving. Those families whose kids got a balloon when they came in bought 25% more food than the families who got one on the way out. It was the same balloon, cost the McDonald's franchisor the same amount, but by giving it at the end, you fumble away the power of the rule for reciprocity. Now, here's another interesting thing about that study. They also looked at the percentage of coffee orders from the family. Now, the kids aren't going to drink coffee, but the parents did. The parents bought more coffee. They didn't just buy more food for their kids. They bought more coffee, right? Because, and this has to do with another one of our principles of influence, the idea of unity, right? If you do a favor for my child, you've done a favor for me, and I owe you. And that's what they found, right? 20% more coffee purchases. So that's the principle of reciprocity. I was surprised. I was surprised that what has changed with these new digital platforms and routes to possible influence is the technology, but not the psychology. There was a study done of 6,200 e-commerce sites that used A/B designs to decide which particular features of the site would be particularly effective in turning prospects into customers, conversions, right? And what they found was it was not things like free delivery or technology on the site that allowed people to move around more quickly and get into their purchase basket more readily. Nothing like that. It was the 6 principles of influence. You know, whether those principles were there. For example, reciprocity. Have you given something to people first? Have you sent them a white paper or a piece of information? The 5 biggest mistakes you can make in this particular domain. Not selling your product, just giving them information that helps them be more informed in the particular domain. That was one. You know what was the top? Scarcity. Another one of the principles that we'll talk about. It was that if what you have to offer is of limited number or of limited supply, of limited time access, that was the most effective. Right? Next was social proof, the idea that if a lot of other people are doing this and they showed the most popular items or those with a trend, right? That was also very effective. The liking principle. Here's something that they found that very few digital sites have. A welcoming letter. A welcoming letter. Just something that increased liking for the web site and designer. Significantly increased conversions, right? Here's the thing that I thought was most interesting. My book, Influence, has been called the Bible of electronic commerce, of digital commerce. When it was first written, there was no digital commerce. There was no internet. So what's crucial about these principles is that they work online too. Not that they work online in some other way, right? They work online too. And that was the thing that was most surprising to me. I expected to find some different configuration. Nope. Exactly what we find in face-to-face contact or typical marketing approaches shows up on digital sites as well.
I just wanted to jump in here and tell you about this new valuable resource that we created for you. The biggest challenge to taking control of your personal finances, improving your investment returns, and building a better future is just getting started. This means getting organized, having a plan, and being disciplined. As Mark Twain once said, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. If you're not satisfied with where you're at financially, whether that be not having enough savings at the end of each month, watching your cash being eroded away by inflation, or maybe you're not sure where to get started with investing, down in the description below, we put together a free guide for you called the 4 Simple Steps to Take Control of Your Personal Finances and Life. You can get this free guide by clicking the link in the description below.
They missed the principle of scarcity. If you remember back then, they didn't just add a new Coke to their product offerings along with the traditional Coke. They took away the taste of Coca-Cola, the traditional taste of Coca-Cola that people had grown up with, right? People get crazy when they lose opportunities that they have experienced in the past and feel that they are entitled to, or when something is rare or scarce or dwindling in availability, they want it more than ever. And what Coca-Cola failed to recognize even though they did taste tests, blind taste tests, where the majority of people who tasted the new Coke versus regular Coke, right, preferred the new Coke, right? Even though that was the case, right? When the old Coke was taken away, now there was a rebellion. People went nuts, demanding to get the old Coke back, which they did by causing Coca-Cola to capitulate and return and pull the new Coke eventually off the shelves and replace it with the new Coke. It's the principle of commitment and consistency. People want to be consistent with what they have committed themselves actively to doing. If you read what Jeff Bezos says about this policy of inviting people to quit, he says in the memo that they get sent every year, we will give you $5,000 if you quit, right? If you want to quit right now, we'll give you $5,000. He says in the memo, but we hope you won't. We don't want you to quit. Right? And in fact, that's exactly what happens. Almost none of these individuals will abandon this job for $5,000. Right? It's a pretty good job in terms of pay and benefits and so on. It's not the greatest in terms of the amount of effort that's involved, but so they don't. But they go on record saying, I don't want to quit. And it's that act of making the commitment to staying that causes them to feel better about their employment, because they've just witnessed themselves making a decision that pushes away $5,000 so they can stay there. And they have to say to themselves, I must really like it here. Right? And that's what they find. Unity principle says that any communicator who can convince us that he or she shares a social or personal identity with us is a member of a particular in-group with us, right, becomes immediately more influential to us. We trust that person more. We want to cooperate with that person more. We want to learn more from that individual. We want to say yes to that individual more. Right? We say yes to the people who share the boundaries of what I call a we relationship. Right? So these are not people who would be able to say, oh, you know, Robert is like us. That's not it. It's Robert is one of us. Robert is of us. If a communicator, if you can get them to say that, everything is easier for you now inside the influence process.
For me, the biggest game changer was this idea of, this is the blueprint of my book, which is this idea of being original and being yourself and not being afraid to be vulnerable, show your personal idiosyncrasies, connect with other people by breaking down and being open and talking about who you really are. That's been the biggest game changer for me.